All right, welcome everybody to our talk on inflammation. And I'm really excited to share all this information. As usual, I find it very interesting, and I hope I give you some valuable information to take away and use right away. So inflammation has been a buzzword and a popular topic, I think, for a while, but especially lately in relationship to the COVID pandemic, an aging baby boomer population, and an uptick really in the diagnosis of autoimmune disorders. I'm even seeing that with my own Ayurvedic clients, and even hearing stories about their what's the word I'm looking for? Rheumatologists, endocrinologists, doctors who deal with specific autoimmune disorders. Their wait lists, their schedules have become really packed. It's even hard to get in to see specialists around the effects of and the diseases related to inflammation. So first, let's answer the question, what is inflammation? Inflammation is, you might already know, is an essential part of the regeneration and the healing process in the body. Inflammation is actually a beneficial process that keeps us healthy. It has one job: to wake up the immune system and your stem cells. It says, hey, something's wrong. We need to either wake up the healing system, the immune system, or both. And which systems become activated depends upon the illness or the injury. And then once the healing is done or your illness has run its course, the anti-inflammatory system activates and shuts the process down to get you back to normal. The problems come in, obviously, when the system doesn't shut off. And this sets us up for a myriad of health problems. In fact, chronic low-level inflammation is the underlying cause of weight gain, early development of various diseases, and acceleration of the aging process. It's estimated that about 60%, so it's over half of Americans, live with an inflammation-related chronic condition. And that could be type 2 diabetes, autoimmune disorders, like I mentioned. Hashimoto's thyroiditis is a big one. And that's actually the leading cause of hypothyroidism. So when you start out with high levels of inflammation, it's a vicious cycle. Take, for example, obesity. The adipose means connective tissue, a form of fat tissue in the body. It produces its own inflammatory proteins. So then the fat cells that are residing in the adipose tissue sense that extra inflammatory protein production, and they are induced to make even more. So that causes not only more inflammation, but more weight gain. So there are a lot of processes or diseases or health challenges that are related to inflammation that have this vicious cycle going on, right? Where the inflammation causes the health challenge, and then the health challenges causes more inflammation. So often by the time inflammation causes a real health problem, it's been going on for a long time and doing a lot of damage behind the scenes. And quite often, we've been ignoring the subtle warning signs that the body's been trying to give us: skin redness, swelling, joint pain, digestive problems, which Ayurveda would tell us is the first indication that there's something wrong, right? We fix our digestion, we heal the entire body. But most people will take a pill or, some Pepto, or get on a prescription or a PCP, a proton pump inhibitor, or sorry, PPI, proton pump inhibitor, and that just masks the symptoms, right? So the inflammation can continue to go unchecked and then continue to wreak havoc and cause damage in the body. But not to fret, there are so many ways to immediately reduce your inflammation and take charge of your health. Some are obvious, some are more subtle. And we're going to go into a lot of detail about these later, but just to sort of give you an overview, they include, and again, we'll go into more detail about this, but smoking, moderating your alcohol consumption, right? So no more than 1 drink a day for women, 2 for men, eat more plants, don't overeat, get at least 7 hours of sleep every night, exercise most days of the week, and reduce your stress through purposeful breathing exercises, mindfulness, meditation daily. And I mean, that can be a lot, but if you start with just one of those things and create a habit around it, create a lifestyle around it, then you can add another and another and another. And it's all the stuff we work on in an Ayurvedic health and healing plan. These small changes each day have profound results, especially when done consistently. And that's really the key, is creating daily habits that you can stick with and repeating them over and over and over again. So they just become a part of who you are, right? So let's talk a little bit more before we get into how to reverse the inflammation, because it's absolutely possible, which is such a great message, I think. Let's talk a little bit more about the actual inflammatory process. What triggers inflammation? Because it's important to know what's causing it so that you can hone in on and pinpoint those things that you're finding in your daily life or your diet that you need to reverse, change, or adapt. The National Institutes of Health classifies inflammation as your immune system's response to any irritant. So that could be an everyday injury, like a little cut, when you're cooking, a sprain on the tennis court, a strain when you're exercising, to a serious infection, and then anything in between. Some of the common symptoms of inflammation are redness, heat, pain, swelling, and loss of function. So all the things that come up around a simple ankle sprain to a major illness or infection of the body. One of the most common inflammation triggers is infection from a virus or bacteria. You feel miserable when you get the flu for two reasons. Your respiratory symptoms come from the flu virus itself, right? So like a runny nose, cough, shortness of breath. But your muscle aches and your fever are actually from the inflammatory process, right? They're a good sign that your body is doing its job of fighting the infection. And here's what's going on behind the scenes. So when acute inflammation, and that's again your body's immediate and natural good response to an injury or an infection happens, your immune system starts producing cells and hormones that it needs to heal. And so some of those cells dilate or expand your blood vessels to allow for more blood and immune system cells to get to that affected area. And so this is what's going to cause some of that general achiness, right? Your blood vessels dilating. And then fever is also part of the inflammatory process. A higher body temperature, which you might already know, creates an inhospitable environment for pathogens, right? They can't survive at even a degree or two higher than our normal body temperature. And this in turn can affect other bodily processes, in that urination, elimination, and sweating are all ways for the body to release heat. So when you are sick, when you have a cold, flu, COVID, you might be urinating more frequently. You might suffer from some loose stool or diarrhea as the body moves food through the system more quickly to release heat. And you might sweat. And these are all attempts, right, to allow the body to cool off. Sweat allows the skin to cool off as the liquid evaporates from it. And so this is why it's a bad idea to take fever reducers or NSAIDs, even for really high fevers, like up to 103, 104. It's going to disrupt the body's natural healing process and take you longer to heal. So a better use of your energy when you're sick like this to reduce, to allow the inflammatory process to carry on, but then also to give it a shorter duration, is a better use of your energy would be to fast, right? To eat either nothing or very lightly. And that's an Ayurvedic practice. So your body can devote energy to the natural inflammatory or healing process instead of having to digest and deal with food. And that's even in folk medicine, where they say feed a cold, starve a fever. So that's why you give your body less work to do, and it can focus on killing the pathogen and creating that inhospitable environment. But you do want to stay hydrated, right? Because you're going to be releasing fluids, sweating, urinating, and also eliminating more. So you want to get a natural electrolyte drink, like we call it Ayurvedic lemonade. And you take water and squeeze some lemon and put a pinch of sea salt or pink Himalayan salt in there, and some maple syrup, because it has a lot of minerals in it. And this is a really nice way to stay hydrated and replace your electrolytes and get a little extra vitamin C in from the lemon or the lime, whichever you choose to use. You could even use fresh orange juice. And this is a better choice than like Gatorade or Powerade, because that's, they're full of sugar. And then another way that inflammation comes up, if you have an injury, you're going to notice other symptoms. So like swelling, redness, and pain at the local site of the cut or the sprain or even a break. Your body's going to respond to that injury by sending molecules like white blood cells and platelets. They're going to go there and aggravate the injured area to draw in other chemicals to start that repair process. So that's sort of what's going on behind the scenes when we have acute inflammation. Just some common examples for you. So these processes are great. They're healing and they will stop on their own, or they should stop on their own when the healing or the repair has occurred. Again, the problems come in when the process doesn't stop, or it's too powerful, or it targets the wrong place at the wrong time. And you'll see that with autoimmune disorders. And so let's talk about the bad inflammation. One example is infection. When the immune system stays active for too long or reacts too strongly, something called a cytokine. Let me type it in the chat box here. It's cytokine, cytokine. A cytokine storm occurs. And this is when the body is overwhelmed by an infection and the immune system works too hard to protect itself. So it results in an overproduction of those inflammatory proteins called cytokines. And that can sometimes lead to a multi-organ shutdown. And we saw this in COVID-19 patients as a result of other underlying infections that they had, autoimmune conditions they had, or other diseases that they already had. Right? So the immune system was already compromised. Another way that we see this bad inflammation is through autoimmune disorders. Normally, our body produces cytokines in an orderly fashion. Everybody knows where they need to go. But if the body is overwhelmed with danger, inflammation can become systemic, right? It happens all over the body, and it can even cause death. In other instances, there's too much inflammation occurring when there's no infection at all. And this is the case with autoimmune disorders or diseases. We're not actually sure why this happens, but autoimmune diseases are characterized by an overactive immune system, which mistakenly attacks healthy tissue. And so these diseases result in inflammation and sometimes irreversible damage of organs, muscles, joints, or other parts of the body. And then the attacking of those healthy tissues that's happening results in more inflammation or a higher inflammatory process because now the body's trying to repair them. So it's, again, when we have inflammation and it goes unchecked and it goes for a really long time, we develop these diseases that then in turn create more inflammation. So it's really important to get that checked in and dialed in as soon as you start to notice it. Aging is another way, and this bad inflammation comes up. Unfortunately, increased inflammation is a normal, they say it's normal, but I don't know that that's truly a normal part of the aging process, but they've even coined a term around it, inflammaging. And as our immune systems decline with age, our protective or good inflammation declines as well, just like all of our systems start to work a little less efficiently. So that immune system or that good inflammation system starts to decline, and that could trigger the bad inflammation. Because if you can't handle everyday irritants, injuries, and common infections, that ongoing inflammatory response doesn't turn off. It's always on because there's always something to repair. There's always something inefficiently going on behind the scenes. And so that results in an increase in health problems, which is, again, that self-perpetuating cycle, right? So the inflammatory system is always on. It creates health challenges, and those health challenges create more inflammation. And then we have bad inflammation coming from things like diet and lifestyle. Too little sleep, poor quality diet, a sedentary lifestyle, not enough exercise can cause oxidative stress. And so that's what happens when there's an imbalance of free radicals, which cause damage to cells, and antioxidants, which help repair cells. And this triggers the immune system to respond with inflammation. The problem is there's no specific disease or injury to respond to. So the body ends up targeting normal cells or healthy cells. And then, as I mentioned before, with autoimmune diseases, the body has to repair those cells that it's actually damaging, and that causes more inflammation. So the results are subtle, but that kind of sort of our diet and lifestyle inflammation or chronic low-grade inflammation is what it's also referred to as, can start to result in things like muscle and joint pains, fatigue and insomnia, weight loss or weight gain, depression and anxiety, digestive issues, of course, and frequent infections. And I would say that most of the clients who come in with a health challenge have at least two, if not three, sometimes all of those things that they're dealing with. And usually they're coming in with a very stressful lifestyle. So let's talk about weight and inflammation because they're related and you might have some questions. So here's one way inflammation can cause your weight to fluctuate. Low-grade chronic inflammation can cause fluid from your blood vessels to seep into your tissues. And that manifests as water retention or weight gain. Or even like if you step on the scale in the morning and then you step on the scale a few hours later, and all of a sudden you've got an extra 5 or 6 pounds on you. So part of that is just, food and hydration throughout the day because we wake up in a slightly dehydrated state and presumably our stomach is empty when we wake up. So some of that is just, putting things into the body, but also some of that is inflammation. So here's a little example that I like to bring up. If you don't drink a lot of liquid or alcohol before bed, but you always have to wake up in the middle of the night to pee because your bladder is full, your body is probably releasing inflammation while you sleep that's built up throughout the day, therefore the excess fluid that had built up around it. So again, if you're drinking a lot of fluid before bed, well, that explains it, right? If you're drinking alcohol, well, that explains it. It's a diuretic. You're going to have to wake up and pee as your body excretes it and detoxifies from it. But if you're not doing those things and you always wake up in the middle of the night, maybe hot, and you have a full bladder, you probably have some chronic low-grade inflammation going on. So if you start to improve your diet, reduce your stress, get into these healthy routines, this will probably stop happening. And so that's a nice way, if this is you, that's a nice natural indicator, right, of how much low-grade inflammation you're carrying around every day. What's happening when you sleep, when you go into rest and digest, when your body's able to release heat, release cortisol, right, and go from fight or flight into that parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest. Also, incidentally, that's when your liver is doing all of its detoxification duties overnight and releasing a lot of heat. So if it's having to do a lot of work, you probably are releasing a lot of fluid and a lot of waste. So inflammation also sets you up for weight gain, right? Not only water retention and fluid retention from that seepage through the blood vessels, but it also affects your insulin and blood sugar responses. Okay, so remember when we talked about excess fat cells producing more inflammatory chemicals, causing more weight gain? And then remember that cytokines are a type of inflammatory protein. Okay, so fat cells, especially in people with chronic disease like type 2 diabetes, actually produce higher levels of these cytokines. And then the cytokines activate certain proteins that suppress your insulin response. So if your body isn't responding to insulin, which is what tells your body to uptake glucose out of your blood or take blood sugar out of your blood after you eat, then your body's going to keep producing insulin and more insulin and more insulin because it sees that you still have high levels of sugar in your blood, right? So it's just going to keep producing the insulin. So that's sort of the process that happens when insulin resistance is going on. And that's usually what it leads up to, and then as a result of also type 2 diabetes. So this also, having all that insulin in your blood, raises your blood pressure, makes you unnecessarily hungry, right? And makes you gain even more weight. So that eventually, because of that insulin output over and over and over again to no avail, it exhausts your pancreas and your livers. And then if you do develop type 2 diabetes, that leads to so many other complications around eyes, extremities, all those things. So there's this direct relationship also between stress and insulin, and that when you're stressed all the time, your body's always producing cortisol. And that is the stress hormone. That's actually, it's a double-edged sword too, right? Just like our inflammatory response. Cortisol, it helps you get ready to run from a perceived threat. But when you have more cortisol in your system, your body suppresses insulin so that you have more sugar or glucose in your blood. So you have the energy to run from that danger that your body thinks is right around the corner. The problem is when you're chronically stressed, right? Your stress response never goes down. Your cortisol never goes back down. Your insulin never goes back down, or rather the blood sugar never goes back down because the insulin doesn't come back up. So it's all right. There's such an intricate system. Having high levels of blood sugar because you're stressed out all the time and your cortisol levels are high also leads to type 2 diabetes, right? Which then leads to more inflammation because of those extra fat cells producing more cytokines. And then also high levels of blood sugar can cause damage to all of the organs over time. So another way inflammation leads to weight gain is because it decreases a hormone called leptin. And leptin is what tells you've had enough to eat. So again, this contributes to more weight gain. And then the weight gain from the extra fat cells producing more cytokines produces more inflammation, right? So really fun, huh? And then, if you couple that with the possibility that you're one of the many people who suffer from inflammation of the thyroid, the organ that regulates our metabolism, this could compound the problem by eventually causing the organ to shut down and stop working altogether. So this is a topic for another time, the thyroid, because it's a really interesting and complicated organ. I'm considering bringing that in as a topic for October or maybe November. But suffice it to say, our diet is really the place to start. And then, like I mentioned, completely reverse inflammation. It's really good news. And there are studies, new studies, in fact, almost every day that prove our gut health is the link between us and our disease manifestation, right? So between humans and their health or humans and their disease. And the gut health also is referred to as the microbiome, right? It's the name for the trillions of organisms living in your digestive tract that control just about every bodily process, even your mind, and affect every gene that you have. You have more organisms living in your microbiome than you do cells in your body. So it's a really important system. And, science is finally, by studying it, is finally proving what Ayurveda has said for thousands of years, that you literally are what you eat. And therefore, all of your health or disease begins in the digestive tract. So our standard American diet, interestingly, sad, and lifestyle are huge culprits behind inflammation, right? They cause this bad inflammation, which can lead to type 2 diabetes, obesity, cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, just to name a few. And these are all diseases that can be directly attributed to lifestyle choices, lifestyle and diet choices. And yes, genetics do come into play, but over 99% of inherited diseases or genes that can lead to diseases are non-determinate. And so that means that just because you inherited a propensity for the development of a disease doesn't mean you'll actually develop it, right? So in other words, your diet and lifestyle choices turn on or turn off those genes. You actually have the power to determine your health or your disease. And this is great news, but also scary, for some people, because more often than not, we don't want to take ownership over our health because it means we have to do something about it. It means we have to change. And that's scary. And that's often perceived at first as not fun until you start to reap the benefits of it. And then you realize it is worth it. Sometimes it's easier to be a victim and blame our genetics than it is to take ownership of how we got there. And there's no shame or blame in owning up to the lifestyle and the choices that brought you to where you are. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to change. So you can absolutely take your health into your hands and reverse what's going on. And this is a nice little saying I've heard somebody say, that if genes, your DNA, right, load the gun, then your environment actually pulls the trigger. So there's a lot of power in what you choose to do or eat every single day, at every single meal, with every single moment that goes by. And there's always an opportunity in every moment. So here are the big inflammatory foods that you should first work to eliminate. Although the the way I work, I like to have people add stuff in. So these are things that, okay, bring them into your consciousness, recognize if you're doing them, and then start to bring in the healthier stuff. Start to bring in the stuff that's anti-inflammatory. And usually what happens is you start being more willing and ready to let go of some of the unsupportive stuff. And then as you continue to reap benefits from the stuff you're adding in and stuff you're ready to let go of, you'll start to be ready to let go of more and more. And then at some point you might have to, sit down and have a talk with yourself or enlist help and support from somebody who can help you let go of the things that you want to let go of, but maybe aren't quite there yet and need a little push. Okay. So again, I'm going to close the door. Okay. Stewie's on one. So the minute I closed the door, he just got closer to the door and started barking next to the door. Okay, so we'll see if he stops. So the big inflammatory foods that you want to work to eliminate are, and you probably know all of these, probably heard these a million times, processed foods. Okay, anything, this is my rule of thumb, is anything with more than 4 or 5 ingredients on the label or anything you don't recognize as food, right? So if it comes in a package, limit that first of all. And then if it does come in a package, make sure that the ingredients are things that you recognize and there's really no more than 4 or 5, if that many. Sugar and sugar-filled foods, right? So the big culprits and the ones that have been really studied are soda. That's a big one. Candy, pastries, and then sugar-filled cereals, right? So comes in a box, check it out, see what's in it. Fried food, because it changes the nature of the food when you fry it at that high of a temperature. In fact, I think I read something about potatoes, which, God, French fries are so delicious, aren't they? But anything that was good about a potato is completely disintegrated once it's fried at that temperature. Anything with partially hydrogenated oil or trans fats. It's been a big movement to eliminate that from people's diets, or there's even on the nutritional labels now, it will say if there are trans fats in a food. So it's important if you're buying things that are in packages to read the labels. More than 1 alcoholic drink a day for women and 2 for men, right? The higher the drinks per day, the higher the inflammatory markers go in all the studies. And if you smoke, right, now's the time to quit because that spikes inflammation and inflammatory markers as well. Right, so all of these foods, processed foods, sugar, fried, partially hydrogenated or trans fat, alcohol, smoking, they all lead to higher inflammation and autoimmune diseases, as well as those higher inflammatory markers. And by the way, when I say inflammatory markers, I'm referring to the ones you can get your doctor to test you for when you go in for your annual physical. And they're very common. And one, you may have already had them. One is CRP, C-reactive protein. I'll put it in here for you, CRP. That's one. And then another is ESR. It's your erythrocyte sedimentation rate. So ESR, it tests how fast your certain blood cells drop down in literally like a test tube vial. And if there are more of certain proteins than those present, then the blood cells will adhere to them, become heavier, and drop or become sediment faster. And then one that's not as widely used is plasma viscosity, PV. So you may have done CRP, C-reactive protein, or ESR, erythrocyte sedimentation rate, especially if you already have been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. Those are 2 that are pretty common. So raised levels of any of these indicate inflammation in the body. Okay, so just a little FYI there. So you can take ownership and ask for these tests if you haven't had them done and see what your markers are. Let's see. So now let's move to the foods that reduce inflammation. Okay, so we want to put these into your diet. And I'll give you some tips that I use to get them in. So the top of the list are blueberries, apples, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, and I even hesitated to bring cabbage in because it's, from an Ayurvedic perspective, it really is hard to digest. It causes most people a lot of gas. So a way to circumvent that is to, because cabbage is so good for you, is to eat it as sauerkraut or kimchi, right? It's been fermented. It's been pre-digested for you. And you can put that on the side of your meals, right? Mix it. You can even mix it into some soup. Don't heat it up too much. You don't want to kill all the good bacteria, but mix it into your food or have it on the side. It's really yummy. And that sour taste will help you digest your food. So that's a really a creative way to get cabbage in, to get those benefits, but then also not to disrupt your digestion, because getting these foods in is great as long as you can break them down, right? Otherwise, you're going to perpetuate things or digestive trouble and potentially disease. So we want to make sure you're breaking down these foods really well. High fiber foods, so oatmeal. And incidentally, it's a great delivery vehicle for blueberries and apples. Whole grain bread, look for really low sugar, very few ingredients. If you have trouble digesting grain, sprouted grain bread is really helpful, and that it's much easier to digest when things have been sprouted. It makes the nutrients that were inside that seed, because that's what grains are, seeds. It makes the nutrients that were potentially, or the potential energy that's hiding in those seeds available all of a sudden because they sprout. So, and then they get ground up and made into flour. Other whole grains that I really like are bulgur wheat, quinoa, which is again a seed, and barley. Barley is really nice in soups and stews. And then of course, fruits and vegetables are really high in fiber. Micronutrients that you really want to bring in and focus on to reduce inflammation are vitamin D, and I supplement with it. It's really good to have your vitamin D levels tested, your vitamin D blood serum levels. You want them to be, normal levels are like anywhere from, depending on which testing company you use, they'll tell you that anything above 20 is good, anything above 30 is good. But really, levels that are higher than 50, 60 are the ones that are associated with the lower risks of all cancers and have greater neuroprotective benefits. So have your vitamin D levels tested and see if you can get them close to or above 50. You obviously get vitamin D from the sun, but you would have to spend like 15 to 20 minutes every day, basically naked in direct sunlight, to get the amount of vitamin D that you need. And if you don't have a risk of skin cancer, you're not worried about the potential for aging your skin unnecessarily, then that's great. But you can also get vitamin D from salmon, canned tuna, especially canned tuna, and mushrooms. Mushrooms are a superfood. They are like anti-cancer, anti-Alzheimer's, anti-everything bad. And again, I do supplement with vitamin D, but I try to bring in more fish during the week, and then I try to include mushrooms in a lot of meals during the week. So vitamin D, and then magnesium, and I supplement with that too before bed. It helps me sleep a little more soundly. It helps relax the nervous system, so fewer muscle cramps if that's something you experience. It helps you absorb calcium that might be lingering around and causing those muscle cramps. And you can get magnesium from nuts, legumes, so beans and lentils, avocado, and spinach. And then fish oil and turmeric. If you are suffering from inflammation, you know this, your markers are high, bring in fish oil, bring in turmeric. You can use it on your foods. You can take capsules. I can make turmeric capsules for you. Take, 1 to 4 capsules twice a day, depending on your symptoms. I like to increase my dosage up to, 4 twice a day around times that I need more healing, or even depending upon your weight. So if you're, it's 3 capsules twice a day when you're around 150 pounds. And then cinnamon is a natural blood sugar regulator, but it's also an anti-inflammatory herb. And ginger, great natural digestive aid. anti-inflammatory. So just to kind of recap, the foods that are really high on the anti-inflammatory list are blueberries, apples, broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage. You want to cook your broccoli and your cauliflower and your cabbage, if you're going to eat cabbage, in oil, well seasoned, a little bit of salt, and even a squeeze of lemon or lime to eat it. And then again, having just a jar of sauerkraut or kimchi in your fridge all the time and putting a little bit on your plate once or twice a day, really great way to sneak that in. High fiber foods. I recommend oatmeal to everyone. It's just an amazing panacea for all digestive elimination trouble, and it lowers blood pressure, blood sugar, cholesterol. And it's a great way to get those blueberries and apples in, great way to get cinnamon and ginger in. And then micronutrients include vitamin D. You can supplement, get more sun, or bring in more salmon, canned tuna, and mushrooms. Magnesium, which you can supplement with or get from nuts, legumes, avocado, and spinach, and fish oil. So turmeric, and then I mentioned cinnamon and ginger. Okay. And then some of the tips just to kind of getting these foods in. So you don't have to think about it too much, just kind of make it, again, part of your lifestyle, right? Have oatmeal every morning and put blueberries or apples plus some walnuts, right? Then you get the magnesium from the walnuts. You also get omega-3s from walnuts, incidentally, and fiber. So put that in your morning oatmeal every day. That's what I do. It's just one less thing I have to think about, right? So every day, my oatmeal, I have either blueberries or apples, I always have walnuts. And if you don't want to have oatmeal, if that's boring to have it every day, or if it's just too heavy for you, you could have those over yogurt. Or if you're not a big breakfast eater, you like to wait a little bit and fast a little while, and you do well with that, you could just have blueberries or apples and walnuts, as a light breakfast or a snack at some point. And then to get in more of those anti-inflammatory omega-3s and vitamin D, have fish, fatty fish, twice a week. Just make it a habit, make it a rule. You want to focus on like the cod, halibut, salmon, or tuna, the wild caught stuff. The farm raised stuff doesn't have the omega-3s or the vitamin D that you need because they're fed grain. And you want your fish to be, again, caught wild so that they actually develop the fats for you to ingest. And then another little rule you could adopt is to have legumes, to have either lentils or beans for 2 meals a week. So fish 2 meals a week, legumes 2 meals a week. And that might be just for you to do, on your own. Like maybe you make a big batch of lentils, you freeze it in batches, and then you have it as like an easy lunch, bring it to work with you, sit down and have it when you're, not feeding your whole family. You can serve it over rice or quinoa or barley, right? And then you get in more whole grains, you get in more fiber. Another thing I like to do is I commit to 1 or more servings of cruciferous vegetables a day. So again, that's the broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, or kimchi. Also includes kale, bok choy. Bok choy I find is much easier to digest than some of the other ones. Collards, collard greens, or arugula. Arugula is really nice, and you can just keep like a box of baby arugula in your fridge and then just dump handfuls of it, mix it into, your soup, your stew, your curry, whatever. And again, if you're prone to gas, you want to cook these in oil, season them well, and have them with a squeeze of lemon or lime, or maybe even a little splash of vinegar. So again, weekly, commit to 2 meals a week of fish, fatty fish, 2 meals a week of lentils or beans. And then every day, bring in something from the cruciferous vegetable family onto your plate, twice a day if you can. And then this is one big one, you want to eliminate or severely restrict processed meat. So that fall into the processed food category, but I didn't mention it, but lunch meats, sausage, right? Anything that's cured, bacon, all the fun foods, I know, all the processed meats, really should not appear in your diet very often. So very seldom should you be putting these into your diet. Because more than any other food, even more than red meat, you can eat red meat and not really increase your risk of cancer or heart disease. It's the processed meat that increases your risk of cancer and heart disease. Therefore, inflammation, right? It brings up your inflammation markers more than any other animal product out there. So really take a look at processed meats in your diet. And they sneak in, if you're having red beans and rice and you're putting andouille in there, for my New Orleans people, every single Monday, you're getting a lot of processed meat in there. You're getting a lot of cured meat in there. So really take a look and try to limit that, because that will really help with your inflammation. All of those foods that I mentioned, right? So lower inflammatory markers. And I don't think it's that hard to start to get those in on a regular basis, but work on one thing at a time. Work on getting apples and blueberries into your, or just the oatmeal, into your life every day, if that's something you want to include. And then next, work on fish, and then work on lentils or legumes. So let's see. Yeah, eating these foods, like I already mentioned, in the right way is a big part of the picture, because it helps reduce your stress. So you want to, when you eat, and we talked about this before in other lectures, you want to eliminate distractions and chew your food really well. This is a game changer for most people with digestive issues, and this will usually solve most digestive problems, is if you just chew your food better, right? And this is what I tell people. There's no magic number as far as how many times you should chew, but if you practice this more often than not, okay, you're about to swallow your food, stop for just a split second and ask yourself, if I spit this out, would I recognize it, right? Aside from the obvious colors that might be in there, would I recognize what this food is? And if the answer is yes, you need to keep chewing, right? So again, there's no magic number. You just want to make sure it's a consistent texture. And like I said, this is magic. This will reduce gas, bloating, even constipation sometimes. And as we know from Ayurveda, everything begins in the digestive tract. So even these gassier forming foods, you can really help yourself out if you just chew them better. And then you want to leave 3 hours between your meals before you eat again, at least 3 hours, at least 3 hours. If you're genuinely hungry, if you have hunger pangs, then have a snack or have your meal at that time, even if it's less than 3 hours, right? But do tune into your hunger. Fasting is a natural process that can greatly reduce your inflammation. Some people notice right away that pain around joints, chronic arthritis, it's gone when they start bringing in fasting between meals and a fasting window overnight, right? So if you leave yourself that time between meals, you allow your body to break down and assimilate all the nutrients properly. And then by actually getting hungry, you allow your liver an opportunity to take that stored fat and turn it into fuel. So you have, 3 stages of digestion: stomach, small intestines, lower intestines. And if your food's only in the second phase in the small intestinal region, and then you put food into the stomach, it's got to divert all the energy that was going to digesting the food in the small intestines, where most of your absorption takes place, a lot of the breakdown of fat takes place. Then it has to divert energy up to the stomach. And so now it's got 2 sort of like incomplete processes going on. And that's where you get the bloating, the gas, the discomfort, and sometimes even diarrhea, because the body's like, oh my God, this is just too much. We've got to get something out of here. We've got to reduce some inflammation. And release some heat. So then all of a sudden, you have loose stool from the stuff that was in your large intestine and hadn't been fully digested or turned into, solid matter. So you want to leave a window in between your meals. So fasting window in between meals, usually pretty easy. And if you're stressed out, take a few breaths, think about whether you're actually hungry, try to take a walk, do a meditation. And, you don't want it to backfire. You don't want to restrict yourself and then overeat or binge eat. But do give yourself some time, tune into your digestive urges. And then similarly, everyone should be giving themselves a natural intermittent fasting window of about 12 hours, right? So we can all just naturally intermittently fast if we would follow the Ayurvedic guidelines of being done with your dinner at least 3 hours before you go to bed, right? So if you're aiming for 10 p.m. bedtime, you want to be done eating dinner by 7. And dinner should be a smaller meal, lunch your largest, because that's going to reflect your metabolism. Your metabolism is highest in the middle of the day, just like the sun. And it starts to set just like the sun at night. So you want your dinner to be a little smaller. And this gives your liver plenty of opportunity to get rid of toxins and for your body to release that inflammation we talked about that's built up over the course of the day, and to go from fight or flight to rest and digest, right? If you sleep with food on your stomach, the liver then, instead of detoxing and helping you release inflammation, it has to assist with digestion. So it's one of the easiest ways to use fasting, which is a natural way to decrease inflammation every single day. right? Including your little mini fast between meals. And then again, if you go a little longer between meals, if you have a constitution that allows you to get a little hungry and kind of be okay with it, that's going to give your liver an opportunity to take some stored fat and turn it into energy. That's going to help with weight loss if that's your goal. So losing weight, speaking of weight loss, will generally lower inflammation, even in people who are at a healthy weight. So it decreases the load on your joints. And that's a common place to experience inflammation symptoms for many people, right, with arthritis. So reducing your portions, giving yourself proper fasting windows, and then staying active, moving purposely for about 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. And it doesn't have to be 30 minutes all at once, right? These are all really key. Now, people who exercise the most, but not necessarily the most intensely, because that can cause chronic inflammation, right? If you're always damaging your body without enough recovery time. The people who exercise the most have the lowest levels of inflammation markers. So exercise is a key component of anti-inflammation. And you don't have to run a marathon. You don't have to go to CrossFit, right? I'm always telling you guys 30 minutes of moderate walking, dancing, calisthenics, like we do in our Tuesday, Thursday morning classes, even gardening. Gardening's a big one. Anything that gets your heart rate up, warms your core body temperature, and then makes you break a little sweat before you cool down is all you need. Also, incidentally, you want to make sure you do kind of cool down. So you don't want to get up to that peak and then just stop and sit down. Your body needs to sort of flush out everything that came up during exercise. So a nice thing to do is, to keep moving around a little bit after you exercise, or making sure that when you get up to that little peak and you start to break your sweat, that you do bring yourself back down, right? You do a little stretching. So stressing the body through exercise and causing a little temporary inflammation is good, because you come back stronger once you've repaired. And this also strengthens the muscles around the joints, right? And takes the load off the joints that may have been damaged from chronic inflammation, whether you suffer from osteoarthritis or even an autoimmune disease like rheumatoid arthritis. This is going to help immensely, right? So strengthening the muscles, taking a little weight off if you have some extra weight that your joints are having to support through exercise, and then looking at those fasting windows and how you're eating your food, super important. And then exercise also reduces our stress. And let's face it, that's a reason many of us overeat, gain weight, get sick, and have chronic levels of inflammation, right? We live in a world in which we have unnatural stressors. We don't have to worry about where we get our food. If we're privileged enough to live in a place where we don't have to worry about where we get our food, or often even cooking or preparing it, a lot of the time, we don't have to worry about the next tribe over invading our village, right? Or we don't have to worry about getting attacked by a lion when we're out hunting for dinner. The human body adapted over millennia, hundreds of thousands of years, to deal with those stressors by creating that stress response, that inflammatory response, and then going away once the danger went away or once the injury was repaired. And today, we have constant stressors from media, right? It shows us war in other countries, natural disasters all over the world, violent crime, right? In our city and everyone else's. We're bombarded with worries, about these dramas that we can't control. Not to mention, it's a really good reason to limit your media exposure. And not to mention, many of our work environments are overly demanding, right? They ask too much of us. They refuse to take into account the other responsibilities we might have, like family, children, or even just taking care of ourselves, even carving out time to go exercise, right? Or to get enough sleep. Or maybe you're a caregiver, right? That's a huge amount of stress. It can really result in a lot of chronic low-grade inflammation. And most caregivers end up getting sick themselves, right? So many of us are in this chronic fight or flight mode. Our cortisol levels are high. Our insulin levels are low. Our blood sugar is high. Our leptin, the thing that tells us that we're not hungry anymore, that we've had enough, is low, right? So it's no wonder that inflammation and autoimmune disorders are on the rise. And we have to intervene. I'd say start with diet, get in that exercise, but don't forget about stress reducing practices, like connecting with other people. I think we really, maybe, I don't know, it's just a conjecture I have, but, maybe we see so many autoimmune disorders on the rise because of the lack of human connectivity, that we were forced into during the pandemic. We have to carve out time for regular social activities and meaningful interaction. And if you've ever studied these blue zones or these cultures around the world that live the longest, that is a huge component and a common thread among all of those communities. They have community, right? They interact with people that they love and care about usually on a daily basis, right? So even if you just text somebody, call somebody, it doesn't have to be a big deal, but just to feel connection to other humans is very therapeutic, helps lower stress and inflammation immensely. And, even 5 minutes a day of a mindfulness practice, so that's a big component of it too, can have profound healing effects because it gives your immune system a good boost. It clears your mind to focus on something other than the daily drama, whether it's through work or just because you feel isolated or have things coming up in your life that you have to deal with. It gives your mind a break to focus on something other than the drama or the stories. And it initiates the rest and digest, the parasympathetic nervous system, right? It's the opposite of the fight or flight or the sympathetic nervous system. And you have to develop a daily practice that gets your body to this state while you're awake to have a truly meaningful impact on your stress, right? We want to downregulate the nervous system while we're awake. That happens when we sleep, but we're not conscious. So if we do it while we're awake, we train ourselves to be able to call upon that when we are stressed out, and we can recover from stress better, right? So the inflammation doesn't stay up, it comes back down when it's supposed to, when the threat is over. And you could do this with 20 minutes of yoga nidra. You could do it with 5 to 10 rounds of breathing. You've got 2 techniques now, the alternate nostril breathing that we did at every workout in August, or the one we use more often, which is that inhale for a certain number of counts, hold or retain the breath for a certain number of counts, and then exhale. That's a lovely practice. Bringing in 5 to 10 rounds of that. You can pick, how long you hold. Just make sure it's not so long that when you're holding your breath, you're actually causing yourself stress, right? So it should be a little challenging. Again, just like exercise, right? A little bit of stress makes us stronger as we recover from it. Or it could just be, 5 to 10 minutes of meditation where you focus the mind instead of the dramas and the stories on your own breath, or a mantra, something you repeat over and over again, or even a guided meditation. There's so many apps out there, to use. And you can also help calm and ground the nervous system and reduce stress when you eat at the same time, sleep and work at the same times, do your mindfulness and exercise at the same time each day, because your body knows what's coming and it can relax. And this greatly reduces stress and therefore inflammation, right? So routine. And I have a feeling you guys already know and are working on all of or a lot of these things. So I hope this gives you more reasons to continue to do your practices, to continue to do regular exercise, to continue to keep working on your diet, keep trying to get in more fish, keep trying to get in more mushrooms, keep trying to get in more nuts and fruits and whole grains, right? To really focus your food around your meals around these foods. Try to get in more of the cruciferous vegetable family, right? The broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, or kimchi, or sauerkraut, bok choy, kale, collard greens, and arugula. So don't forget about arugula. It's an easy one, and a lot of people respond to it better than they do some of the heavier ones like broccoli and kale. Inflammation is really fascinating. On the one hand, it's incredibly useful, but when it goes on for too long, it can be deadly. And I think the most important thing that I want you to take away from this is that it's completely reversible, right? So you want to start with one thing, your diet or your sleep, right? And I didn't touch a lot on sleep, but getting less than 7 hours of sleep increases those inflammatory markers, so highly, so detrimentally. So make sure you're getting sleep, because that's where your body repairs itself. That's where we release and reduce inflammation. Exercise, or maybe focus on the mindfulness practices. I think that sometimes the mindfulness practices are the hardest things for people to wrap their mind around or find value in, because they have a cumulative effect, right? You might not see the results right away, but over time, you will. You really will. You'll wake up one day and say, wow, I haven't had an argument with my significant other like all week. I'm so much calmer and more patient, or you call customer service and wow, I was really nice to that person. And that was a tense situation. I was pretty upset about that. So you will see the effects. It's just they're not usually right away. So please do try to find some value in those practices though, and just do a little bit every day. You just have to do a little bit. That's all. You just have to do it every day. So take one practice, take one aspect, take even just one food you're trying to get in, do it for 1 month, do it regularly, make it a real habit, a real part of your lifestyle. So you don't even have to think about it. Like, that's just who I am. I just have my oatmeal and my blueberries or my apples with walnuts every morning, whatever that is, or that's just what I do. I wake up and I do 15 minutes of meditation and then I go about my day and I don't think about it anymore. Right. And so once that becomes part of just who you are, move on to something else, right? Work on the next thing. And please let me know if I can support you in any way. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for attending. I'm going to turn the camera or not the camera, the recording off, but then I'll still be here if anybody has questions they want to ask. Okay. So thanks again, everybody.